Okay, we're going to start a minute early so we can move right along here. Please rise for a pledge of allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Amen.
Amen.
I'm going to call the December the 12th meeting of the Currituck County Planning Board to order. At this point, I need to ask if anybody has disqualifications for these items on the agenda tonight, and I'll read you what that qualifies for. If you are in accordance with the State Government Ethics Act, it is the duty of every board member to avoid conflicts of interest. Does any board member have any known conflict of interest with respect to any matters coming before the board today? If so, please identify the conflict and refrain from any participation in that particular matter involved. Does that apply to anybody?
No, ma'am.
All righty. We have a quorum tonight with 7 out of 8 being present. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
Motion to approve. Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All approved, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposition? So moved. I would now entertain a motion for the approval of the minutes for the November 14th, 2017 meeting.
Motion to approve the minutes.
We have a motion. Have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Minutes are approved. Okay, let's move on to our first item, which is an item of old business. PB 1707 Ponderosa Enterprises Incorporated. Request for zoning map amendment to rezone approximately 12 acres from agriculture to general business, conventional zoning district of property located on the Shortcut Road, adjacent to Ponderosa Mobile Home Park, tax map 52, parcel 22A, Crawford Township. And Ms. Vallow, I believe this is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. This request, I won't go through the entire request since we went in detail at the November meeting. But since then, staff has met with the applicant, David Sawyer of Ponderosa Enterprises, to try to work through some of the issues related to the request and trying to make sure it was consistent with the small area plan as well as the land use plan. Unfortunately, given the fact that 3/4 of the property already contains general business zoning, the applicant did not want to further restrict the property with conditions. They do not have a tenant or an purchaser for the proposed development, and further restricting their property that currently is zone business was a concern that they had. The other option that they had was to rezone to do a subdivision of property. The area that's shown in the agricultural area, which is about 2 acres, would require a division. And at this time, it doesn't fit within their time frame, and they'd like to proceed forward with their request for conventional zoning to general business. As we discussed at the last meeting, staff is unable to basically determine that they are consistent with the land use plan and the small area plan due to the lack of information that's provided. And that pretty much has to do with policy statements CD2, CD4, CD9, FD1 of the land use plan, and LU9 and TR4 of the Maple Barco small area plan. What that deals with is site design that is basically shown to not allow for strip development, provide for pedestrian circulation, and design controls that would have consistent signage and building elevation. So with that, we are recommending denial of the request because it is not found consistent with the land use plan and the small area plan. And we do not feel that it's reasonable and in the public interest because it does not adequately address the site design in terms of preventing the strip development, and it does not incorporate any access controls or pedestrian circulation, signage, buffer, or scale of the development through a conceptual plan. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have, and Mr. Sawyer is here as well to go over any questions you may have related to his application.
Okay, let's begin with anybody have any questions for Ms. Voliva?
Ms. Bolivar, if in the event we were to deny the request, how long does the applicant have to wait in order to reapply later if they were to withdraw after we deny them?
If the planning board recommends denial of the request, the applicant has the option of withdrawing their application before public notification has been sent to the adjoining property owners without delay of a new application. So they could submit a new application at any point. However, once notification has been sent to the adjoining property owners of the public hearing that would be scheduled before the Board of Commissioners, they would have to wait 1 year to make a new application.
So if the applicant had any plans to withdraw, it would be logical for them to do that either before our denial or shortly thereafter the denial, before the advertisement goes out.
Before the advertisement would go out, that's correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Ms. Voliva?
Yes, well, follow up on that, how long does it usually take to send out the notification to the adjacent property owners?
We do the notification to the adjoining property owners 10 days before the Board of Commissioners meeting. Minimum 10 days. So it can be 2 weeks before.
So there's only a very short period of time once the planning board meets and makes a decision before they are mailed out. And that's certified mail.
A week to 2 weeks, yeah.
Any other questions? Mr. Sawyer? Please state your name and address.
Yes, David Sawyer, 127 His Way, Barco, NC. I appreciate your question, and I like to be open and honest. It's pretty simple, straightforward. We want to rezone the property. We want to work with the county. We want to do what's right. I've been a licensed real estate agent since 1980. We've developed subdivisions. We've bought land, sold land. And only recently came to the awareness that it really isn't our land always to do what we feel like should be done, even though it'd be logical. We understand the county's position under the UDO. We also understand that it's real restrictive as far as ordinance against landowners in the real estate industry. It's looked at that. I just want to know what we need to do, and I've met with Donna trying to do that. The reason we couldn't go forward is because the whole property, the 40 acres, would have had been rezoned more restricted than what it is now. I think that's just logical for us not to go that route. One of the questions I had with this rezoning is that if we didn't provide a plat without a survey, I don't know how we hardly go about it because it's rather ambiguous if you look at the map here, there's never been a plat, to my knowledge, showing the exact footage across the pasture land, where the pasture land and the general business meet. So it's more logical for us to say that we wanted to rezone the remainder that's not zoned general business this time. And we just thought it would be more logical to request that it be zoned just like the property that's we own, and the property the county owns across the street, the neighboring property, which is heavy industrial, which is, you know, much more difficult to get as far as the rezoning. So therefore, that's why we went with just the general business and conventional. We want to go ahead and get it so that we can do something with the property and start to entertain people that would know more about development than we do. So that's why we've done this, and we come tonight just requesting that, I think I talked before about, there's got to be some point where you just say, well, you know, obviously landowners should want to develop property in the best way they can to, you know, make the most money they can if that's what they want to do on the property. And there's just got to be a certain amount of trust, as I mentioned before. So we just request that you would consider just making all of our properties the same thing. The county itself zoned it without even really any consultation with us through the UDO. All of our property was zoned general business that we've got our mobile home park on in our storage building. So we just request y'all's consideration that we would move forward in a way that we would work with the county. I know it's a difficult thing for you to go against a recommendation of staff, but I, for once, would like to see us not vote down party lines all the time. I think it's something that's really seen in our government now. I'd just like for everybody to just consider what we have is a good business, and that's what we want. I live right there on the property. I don't want anything that's going to be detrimental to myself or the county. So thank you for your time. If you have any questions.
I do. I'd like to make an assumption based on what you just said. No party lines. I believe in property rights. I believe that the landowners should be able to develop their properties as they see fit. My assumption is, based on what you just said, that what you're looking to do is either just maintain the value of your property or be able to do what you want with it at a later date. Is that correct?
Yes, we'd like to, I think as anyone that owns land, we'd like to utilize the property to its best use, and we just see what's coming. After we met, just to kind of give an example, because and this isn't just something I've brought up, you know, I've talked with Donna several times, I've met with Dan, I've met with Jason Weeks, talked with people at the Y, and we see the activity. My wife and I, we walk the property all around the airport when the weather's conducive, just about every day. And not long after we met, Jason finally got a travel team to come in from Virginia and play a baseball tournament. And it was really a good quality event. It was, you know, parking lots were full. And after we walked, we went to the 7-Eleven. The 7-Eleven at Barkley has 11 parking spaces. And there was a lady walking out as I was going in. And it was obvious she was frustrated. She was double parked behind somebody. And I looked and she had a Virginia license plate. Everybody in the ball field had a Virginia license plate. And that's what we've been talking about with the county. We'd like to talk with somebody with some expertise, maybe to develop something right in front of the county's property that would cause people to want to come back. The old saying in the field of dreams is you build it, they'll come. But they may only come back one time. If we really don't start providing something, that's what we'd like to do. We'd like to work with the county with it.
So my follow-on question would be to Donna. The county's hesitation in this is just that there's no plan in place right now, and there's no purchaser in place, so that's why the county is hesitant. So with that assumption, how amenable is the county going to be once they do come up with a plan, or once they do have a buyer? How amenable are you going to be to rezone it the way that Mr. Sawyer wants it rezoned?
General business is, for the most part, consistent with the plan. The problem is site design, making sure that the site features and elements are maintaining the policies and goals of the land use plan and the small area plan. So generally supportive of the zoning. Don't see that as being too much of an issue, just making sure that whatever use is something that would be compatible with that area. And I feel like that they would do the same.
So convenience store wouldn't be out of the question.
Convenience store would not be out of the question. If one wanted to locate there, as long as we could make sure that the elements of the city design are consistent with the plans in place. And, parking layout, driveway cuts, pedestrian circulation, interconnectivity, signage, building elevations, those types of things.
And again, considering the county's position on this, I mean, you stated we would vote along party lines, but I don't really think any of us up here would ever consider doing that. We really do want to take your ideas into consideration, as well as what's restricting the county from approving it, and kind of figure out a plan somewhere in the middle where it would make both of you happy. Does that sound reasonable to you, what Ms. Volova just said, or?
Yes, and, you know, in meeting with, some of our meetings with Dan, one of the things we would like to do is actually make it look like it'd be part of what the county's doing, as far as, the color of brick, or, you know, the color of the metal roofing, things of that nature, so it would look like it's part of the area. And, we think it would be conducive to do that, just from the standpoint of the business. It'd be more attractive to people come in.
Sure.
And, one of the things that, has always concerned me is everybody always develops land without any plan for parking. And, you know, we would like to develop it in such a way that people want to come there because they could get in and out. I mean, I live right there, and some days I get frustrated going to the 7-Eleven park up. And it's, so things like that are, you know, we don't see why it's really that big of a concern, to be honest with you. Knowing what we want to do, and I understand
Sure.
that gets back to, you basically don't trust us.
Well, it's not a matter of trust. I mean, if I think this wouldn't even be considered at this point if we had a plan before us stating what you just said. I don't think any of us would have a problem approving it right now.
Right. And, you know, there again, one thing I found is there's a lot of people that's a whole lot smarter than I am about development.
Me too.
And a lot of the places you look at that want to locate an area, one of the objections and problems we have in our county is we've got a lot of cars, but we don't have a lot of housetops. And
Sure.
a lot of them want to look at housetops. But one of the first questions just about on most of their applications is, what is the property zone? And so if you can't say it's zoned conducive for them to come to the area, they really don't want to get into the local government discussion of if the property can be used or not.
So you're talking more of like a franchise type, like a 7-Eleven type, rather than your own type of convenience store.
Right, yeah.
I see what you're saying, yeah.
What we'd like to do, we've always, you know, had a business, the backbone was basically on rental property. And that's what we want to do. We want to partner with somebody that would have an expertise to come in and us to work with them on providing the land and then providing the expertise on building something.
So it sounds kind of like a catch-22. The franchises won't consider it if the land isn't already zoned, and they won't zone it unless there's a plan in place.
Right. That's kind of where we feel, you know.
Hmm.
For me to present you a plan, it's going to be way short of what it should be probably. You know, I'd much rather depend on somebody that's already built 100 of these convenience stores and knows the ins and outs and this all.
Well, if a plan could be presented, I don't know if the franchise would allow that, but if a plan could be presented tentatively with let's say a 7-Eleven franchise, and it meets all of the requirements, we could readjust it at that point. And even if it gets approved for a conditional rezoning in that case, it wouldn't necessarily have to be a 7-Eleven. It could be a Wawa. It could be, as long as it meets those same requirements.
He probably wouldn't want to box himself into just a convenience store.
Sure,
I
yeah,
would imagine you'd want to do something retail office,
Sure.
something that you
Yeah,
feel
we're
like,
open.
yeah.
This is something I see as a real need for our area. It's somewhere for people to be able to go and park, just go and get things. That's just something that I see. But someone else could have a vision that, you know, we'd be open to as well.
You know, general building layout, general access
Sure.
point.
You know, in meeting with Don, I was excited about it, maybe just us getting together and working out I don't mind a conditional, rezoning as long as we understand what the conditions are. But it's like it's vague to me. Maybe I need to just sit down and read it all, but F9, L64, and all of this is, these are just figures. I want to know what you want me to do. Are you going to require an apron so long for ingress and egress, or you want so many square footage of parking for square footage of building? Things like this that we could, work out. And I was looking forward to doing that, but when I found out it's going to involve the mobile home park and everything we have now to go under the new zoning, that's just something we're not willing to do. And I don't quite understand why that we just can't rezone the agricultural part. The county came in and rezoned the part that's now general business.
If he were to come back with a conditional rezoning, it would not be able to be a split zone piece of property anymore?
That's correct. General statutes require that conditional zonings follow property lines. So,
So have to be resurveyed and
So that would require him
correct.
to have to rezone the
A
entire
division
piece
of property. Or subject the entire 42 acres under the conditional zoning, which it's not that way now, and that's a difficult pill to swallow if you're not ready to develop it right now.
And when the county zoned general business, that didn't apply.
It did not apply. When there are a lot of properties out there today that do not have conditions on them, rezonings that have been done probably since 2013, maybe even before then. Probably 2008-ish are conditional zonings for the most part. They generally don't submit conventional rezonings. I think this one and the one that we just recently had at the same meeting in November were the first two we've had since we adopted conditional zoning.
how amenable are you to parceling off that 12-acre lot?
Pardon?
How amenable are you to parceling that 12-acre lot separate from Ponderosa?
That's really where I'm at. One of the biggest problems is like I say though, that where is the line drawn? Right now it's just a red painted area. So
There's no actual survey.
there's no actual
Sure.
survey as to what the county did as general business. And so I don't know if it'd be if we go to a point, just said this is the area, then we're going to be taking part of probably the general business or something.
How would we do that, Donna?
You would work with a surveyor to identify those lines. Obviously, you wouldn't have a gap between that. You'd want to make sure that you're not leaving a strip of agricultural in there. We don't have a true meets and bounds line for that general business boundary and agricultural boundary. So I feel like that could be worked out with the surveyor relatively easily. It's just a process of going through that. If I remember, there was a 2005 survey that could have been close to this boundary, but may not necessarily follow those lines.
I'm assuming that's what it was. I thought that's what it was, but
It could be. It could be.
And so, the thing is I met with a surveyor who works with the county a lot last December, requesting him to take this ball and run with it. I was going to go to Florida. I met with him, sat down and told him, gave him the plat, told him whatever he needed to do. I went around and find the pins, so if he needed to survey it out. And so I called him 6 or 8 times while I was in Florida and never got any action. So then I started the process. And so now here I am now a year later, basically going back, doing the same thing. I just want to get it done. And we don't mind, really saying this is the property we want zoned. It's still, I guess to satisfy everybody, we can parcel it out. I asked you, did we need to deed it out separate? I hope we don't have to go that far.
You can just do the map as long as it is physically separated for tax purposes. So we could talk with the tax department to find out what that specifically means. If there's any other way to do that without recording a deed, we can get those questions answered for you.
And that goes back to why I appreciate your question so much, because I'm already a year into it. If the county denies it, the commissioners deny it, no matter what y'all do, then I'm another year pushed it down the road. I'm turning 60 next month, and would like to see something done, within a reasonable time. But we do want to work with the county, and I appreciate y'all's consideration. I understand the county's concerns about what the properties are going to be, how they're going to be developed, what it's going to be. I understand all those things, but sometimes it's just impossible to answer all the questions until something is done. And then when it's being done, that's when our partnership and relationship really needs to work, and that's what we want to do. We want it to work. I work good with Donna. I enjoy speaking with her about what we need to do, and we're willing to do that. And getting back to again your question, start with that's what we're going to do. Is we're going to take and withdraw this application, and I'll go ahead and say that now because I wanted us to have this discussion first, so that you kind of knew our heart, knew what we're wanting to do, and we'll start anew. I'll get Eddie Hyman to start working on it and see if we can't get some actual square footage of what we're going to be using as some new zoning.
And we'll be glad to work with him
I hope you get
and
with
try.
work.
Yeah.
I know it's good times, I understand people are busy and everything, it's
Yeah.
good times, but if I hire you, I'd like you to work.
I'd just like to say one thing, please. Number one, this board does not vote along party lines.
Oh,
Because we have a good time when we can vote against staff.
yes, we do.
We have been known to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And I told Donna, I was up front with her, I said, I understand her job is to take and read the UDO and to present it to y'all and to say what it says. And I understand your job is to take that in consideration. And I understand it's difficult for you to take and say, you've recommended this, but, and, when I was saying that tonight, I'd already made up my mind that I was going to take and just start with you and see if we could start fresh. But I said it basically because we need to get back to a government that really has some individual thought involved in it. And I think y'all are part of that, and I appreciate y'all's time and discussion on it. And we look forward to working together with the county and developing this property.
And I am a firm believer in a person being able to do with their property
Absolutely.
what they want to do. That was taught to me by my father many years ago, and sometimes our hands are tied by rules and regulations, and it goes against my grain quite a bit. But I can vote, forget it, but I'm gonna not be in the majority. But I appreciate your circumstances, and I think it's.
We'll work it
I
out.
think it's too bad that you have to go through all this to take care of your own property.
The older I get, the more I realize the songs of my youth are real true. And you don't need to fight the law because the law will win.
Donna, I've got a question for both parties really here. Because of the nature of what the property is currently used for as a mobile home park, and if I understood you right, when the county came through and zoned the whole area general business, except for what was agriculture or something like that, what is the current status of the mobile home park? Is that allowed? That's not even allowed in a general business district, is it?
It is a legal non-conforming use of property.
Yeah, because it's
So it can
grandfathered,
remain, they can move mobile homes in and out on
Can't
the,
add to.
correct.
Can't add to 5 more parcels on that 12
Correct.
acres or anything like that. Okay, so, but the parcel that doesn't have the mobile homes on it, that's by the county existing agriculture?
Yes, he currently has
cows on it right now.
livestock on that property.
Okay,
One died last year. I drove by there.
Yeah, I lost my bull last year.
Yeah.
all right, so that's my question. So what he needs to do is come in and designate the area that's now agricultural and take it over to a general business. But that's where you have to have the dividing line between what is exactly the mobile home park and versus the land that he wants to take from agriculture to business.
Correct.
Do you understand what I was asking?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It is somewhat confusing.
Yeah, and I don't know the area well enough to say, oh, well, there's a nice straight line down here that goes.
One thing that I was going to say is the Dominion Energy right-of-way line.
Oh, yeah.
Defined line
That's
that
right.
runs down the back of this property and goes to what is already, in other words, can this encroach upon general business any at all? This line, that would be a protected line, but that does go to the parcel within zone for.
Whatever boundary you want the property to be would be your boundary for your conditional zoning request. So let's say, for instance, you wanted to, you may want to include the whole front of the property. If you did, then that would be your new boundary. And then you would conditionally zone that boundary. Or it may just be what's currently agricultural. There's nothing that says that it can't extend into that what's now general business, because it could.
The reason I was
But
saying that-
there'd be no need for you to do that.
Right.
Unless you have a vision or something in mind that would include maybe a current access point that you have there. And you might want to build off of that.
I'm sorry, but I need to call time on this issue. Thank you, and I will ask if there's anybody else that wants to speak to this very quickly. No,
Time can tonight.
Yes, sir.
thank you.
Resolve it.
So as I understand this, if he is going to withdraw this,
No
then
vote
we don't
required.
need to vote or anything, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
I have a
So,
question for you, Ms. Volova. If you can speculate as to the reason why the entire parcel was not zoned general business at the time the county created the mobile home park area as general business, what might have been the reasons at that time it didn't occur that way?
I think this probably happened in 2013 or 2012, around the time when we adopted the current UDO and official zoning map. There were some modifications to their zoning line at that time, and I would venture to guess the reason why it stopped where it did was because of the agricultural use currently being made of that property, and there was no need at that point to change the zoning over to anything other than agricultural.
Is it possible for the Board of Commissioners to rezone it without interaction from Mr. Sawyer?
It is not. Any property that the zoning changed during that UDO update and official zoning map, we were required to notify those individuals by registered mail and also post notice in the newspaper of any of those changes, which we did do.
Cultural as well?
I don't remember exactly where the boundary line fell, but there were specific changes to that property during the 2013 update.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sawyer.
thank you, and let's move to the next item. The next item is PB 15-15 Countryside Estates, NCBC. Request for conditional zoning amendment on property zone C, MXR, to remove the farmland buffer, reduce the width of the type A perimeter buffer, and clarify the pedestrian improvements on 55.66 acres. The property is located in Moyock on the west side of Currituck Highway, south of North Point Boulevard, tax map 9, parcel 79B, Moyock Township. Mrs. Volova.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. This request before you tonight, submitted by the property owner, Countryside Estates, is located just south of North Point subdivision. It is the site of a 62-lot residential subdivision that's currently under construction. If you can remember back a couple of years ago, if you were on the board then, this request came before you as a conditional zoning. to allow for the development of that property as a residential subdivision, and it placed certain conditions on the property. Those are which you can find in your packet. One specific condition had to do with a farmland buffer along the southern boundary line known as the Frank Williams or Currituck F&W Land Company property. So there was a farmland buffer required along this property line, actually on the adjacent property and not on the proposed development. As I mentioned, this property is currently zoned conditional MXR. Property to the north is agricultural, to the west is agricultural, to the south contains an MXR zoning and a general business zoning. It is located within the full service area of the I'm still on the last project of the Moyock Small Area Plan. And then I also included in this presentation what we're calling the Moyock Mega Site or Currituck Station.
Rubs in every time she gets, don't she?
And I look at you every time.
I know.
So this property, when it came forward in 2015, was within the boundaries of this plan, but the plan had not been presented or approved by the county. So Mr. Napolitano, the developer of the property, proceeded on with his construction of his project. The county adopted the master plan of this mega site and included his property in that area. His property is labeled as a low-density residential, which is what he's developing it as. But that property known as the Currituck F&W Land Company, the Williams property, located just to the south, now has a higher density or a more intense use allowed on that property. Doesn't mean that that's what currently is there or exactly how it will be developed, but should they move forward with any type of rezoning or plan on that property, we would want it to be consistent with the master plan. That medium density will allow for, like I said, a more intense use and no longer would require that buffer along that boundary. The farmland would not be there anymore. County has been in contact with several entities about development in this area, which has included the Williams property. So we feel like it will in the near future be developed out and eliminate the need for that buffer. Also in this request, you will find the modification to the buffer located along the northern boundary, the boundary that adjoins the North Point subdivision. The UDO requires that when you have a zoning district that's more intense, like the MXR zoning, you have to provide a buffer along your boundary with a less intense zoning, theirs being agricultural. So that required a type A buffer. Well, that type A buffer, the UDO allows two options. Option one is a 25-foot buffer that just has trees, a series of canopy trees and understory trees, and it also allows for a 10-foot reduced buffer width that incorporates canopy trees, more understory trees, and shrubs. So the closer you are to that property line, you're buffering at a lower level, and you're putting in those shrubs to help provide that visual and separation between the adjacent landowner. However, on Mr. Napolitano's plan, instead of it stating type A buffer, it specifically stated a 25-foot type A buffer. So any modification of that width required him to come back before the board to reduce it. So he is coming back to the board to ask for a reduction in that width along that northern line from 25 feet to 20 feet. Inside that 20-foot, he will incorporate a 10-foot planted buffer and an additional 10 feet, which he could put the vegetation in there as well. So he could pull that vegetation off the property line. We are including in, and the county agrees to this, that should he decide to do the 25-foot buffer, he could in fact do that without having to come back before the board should this get approved. So he would then have the option of doing the 25-foot buffer or the reduced 20-foot buffer. And we feel that's meeting the intent and the meeting the intent of the ordinance and the plans. I won't go through each one of the review standards for this, since it pretty much is an amendment to his plan, most of which apply to the initial request. But we do feel like that this meets all requirements of the ordinance and is consistent with the plans. The Technical Review Committee has recommended approval of this request. We see no real issues related to that. Before I go through the consistency and point out the suggested zoning conditions, I do want to bring up the community meeting that was held for this request. The few members that did, or the few citizens that did attend that meeting were from the North Point subdivision. They had concerns about drainage. There was never any indication that they had concerns about the buffer reduction. So their concerns had to do with water that was backing up on their property. And Mr. Napolitano may be able to answer some of those questions as to where he's at in terms of drainage, should that be a question that the board has. So getting back to the recommendation and conditions of approval, we actually suggest that should the board choose to approve this, that we maintain the current conditions of the conditional zoning, items 1 and 2, and that we remove 3 and 4 and put in a new 3 that would state a type A buffer along the northern property line, the North Point boundary, shall be installed in accordance with option 1 at a 25-foot width, or a modified option 2 that would include the 10-foot planting width with an additional 10-foot buffer provided for a total of 20 feet. Those are the conditions that we agree and support, and we believe this request is consistent with the land use plan policies HM1, PP2, and the MOYOC policy emphasis for the land use plan, it being in full service, and the MOYOC small area plan IS2 and FLU1. And we believe it is reasonable and in the public interest because it provides for and continues to provide for the perimeter buffer between the existing development along the North Point boundary and the proposed development. And I'll be glad to answer any questions you may have.
Am I correct, Ms. Valva, in saying that on the northern property line, they could actually do only a 10-foot without having the additional 10-foot buffer?
If the ordinance was all that applied to this property, and there was a statement that he had to meet the type, or that the development had to meet the type A buffer yard, there are 2 options, 25 feet and 10 feet. The applicant is proposing a 20-foot buffer, so he is asked for the 10-foot planting and an additional 10 feet. So
The reality of it is he could actually do only 10 feet.
If
he could do 25 or 10,
Right.
yes, but he is asking for a modified 10.
What is the purpose for the additional 10 feet of buffer?
I'd have to let the applicant answer that question.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, if the applicant would step forward and state your name and address, please.
Good evening, I'm John Napolitano. My address is 1492 I think Ms. Oliver did a great job of laying it out. The reason that we were coming back on the one on the southern border, where we had agreed to the 50-foot farm buffer, we had worked out a deal with Mr. Williams that we could put that buffer on his property if we would give him, where there's a connector road to eventually go to his property, if we ran a pipe out there that he could tie into our pump station. We did. Now the mega plan has been approved, and that property is changing what the dynamics of that would have been. Our concern is that we put in this 50-foot buffer. At the time that it's starting to mature, somebody's going to come along to develop that property, and they're going to wipe that buffer out at that point, or it's going to put some limitations on that property because there's this buffer that's going to be there in the way, which would be in the way of developing the mega site the way that it was approved by the county. So that's why we're asking to eliminate that buffer. On the other side, it's a little confusing on the northland side. When we originally came in for the rezoning, we honestly thought that most of the trees between Countryside and North Point would be removed as part of our property, as part of our land. When we really got in there and were able to clear the land and get in there and truly survey it and get, all the property lines fully identified, none of those trees came down at all. In fact, the entire buffer between the two properties is still completely intact. Most of it is, in fact, all of it, the ditch is on North Point's property. So we came back, really kind of came back at first to try and get rid of that buffer completely because the trees were there. Unfortunately, at the town meeting, my original plan was to go to a 10-foot buffer, which I believe you just asked about. They never gave me a chance to talk about that. They came that evening to complain about drainage issues that I had never heard a word about. Nobody had ever contacted me. After 45 minutes at the meeting, I finally looked at them and said, folks, we can stand here another 45 minutes. My answer's still going to be the same. It's 7 o'clock in the evening. This is the first I'm hearing about it, but tomorrow I will be on the site personally to see what's going on. The next day I went to the site. I emailed each of the people that had an issue with the resolution to it. Now, not everything was done right then and there that very minute. We're still working out there. One of the problems is the ditch on the western end. When it was cut, it was a brand new ditch that was put in to help the drainage of the North Point ditch. Bottom line is, with some erosion and things, it was back draining a little bit. Well, we couldn't go in and finish it because we couldn't clear the ditch on the south side, Frank Williams' side, because he had just planted his beans. Now, I'm not from Quebec, I'm not a farmer, but we had to wait till he picked the beans before we could go in and do anything. We're actually right now, presently, in the process of clearing that ditch and going back to fix that that west ditch. The other little issues that they had in there, one was where we had dammed up a ditch through the middle so that we could pump into that to drain it to the south. The contractor on Friday afternoon, before he left, we were expecting a lot of rain that weekend. He opened the ditch back up so that the North Point ditch filled with water. It had a place to drain. Well, obviously, when he did that, it back drained as well and put water back in the North Point ditch. As I've told them all, let me finish. If there's issues, we will address them. That I've said from day one when we started this project, because we knew North Point ditch was a problem. No question about it. The county knows it. We know it. But it's not on our property, and I said from the beginning that we will not exasperate their problem. We'll do whatever we can to try and help it, but we won't make it worse. At the end of the day, I believe we're going to help it because of the 36-inch pipe that we put right through the middle that's going to drain the majority of that ditch that is now open and operating once we clear the bottom part. So, why did I get into that tangent? Because at that meeting, they never allowed me to ever talk about the 10-foot buffer. I tried to explain to them that by going from a 10-foot buffer from a 20-foot buffer, which is, I actually thought it was a 20-foot buffer, not 25. But from going from a 20 or 25-foot buffer to a 10-foot buffer, it would actually cost me more money because I would have to put more plantings in two reasons. One, it would create a better buffer between the two communities, and secondly, it would give my customers 10 more foot of backyard by cutting it down. To me, it was a win-win. Unfortunately, the residents of North Point, I guess they felt like I was getting away with something from going from a 20 to a 10-foot buffer. At the end of the evening, I finally just said, fine, you know what, y'all just saved me money, I'll stick with the 25-foot buffer. Honestly, if there's an opportunity to go to the 10 and put in the extra landscaping, I'd just as soon do that. I think it would be a better finished product for both communities at the end of the day. And I'm willing to spend the extra to give us all a better community. It's been my intention from day one when we started this community. So the south buffer, we absolutely would like to try and eliminate. The north buffer, I'm not sure.
Tonight, it's
Yeah.
an easy answer.
Huh?
I said, tonight, it's an easy answer.
And what is that answer? Fill me in.
We would support either way.
Yeah.
So both options are consistent with the UDO and would meet the UDO requirements. Giving the additional 10 feet, if you don't put plantings in there, most likely we'll probably have structures in there at some point.
I think I'd just like to hear if there's any opposition before we ask any questions. I went around the neighborhood today, and I actually called all the folks that showed up at the meeting, and they all seem fairly satisfied that the drainage issues are being taken care of. Don't want to dwell on that too much,
We
but
ain't talking about drainage.
I stopped. Yeah, right.
I'm standing behind.
But it was about 50-50, the folks, because I thought it was going to go to a 10 as well. Half of them said they were fine with a 10-foot, half of them said they'd prefer to stay at 20. So
Did they give you a reason why?
No,
Because
none.
I tried to ask that question, what, in my mind.
I can't speculate.
Less
Yeah.
vegetation versus a 10-foot buffer with more dense vegetation.
I asked them if they were that concerned about it, the ones that were opposed to the 10-foot, could they please show up at the meeting tonight?
Okay.
So.
Okay, anybody have any further questions for Mr. Napoleano?
I have a question for you, sir, if you don't mind. Does it make sense to you to have only a 10-foot buffer with the plantings instead of having a 10-foot buffer with the plantings and an additional 10 feet?
I would prefer just the 10-foot.
It really doesn't make sense if he's able to legally do the
Right.
10-foot buffer with the plantings and then add another 10 feet. It doesn't make sense. No. I mean, your cost to do that would be the same thing as far as cost of plantings. You're still going to put the same amount in that 10-foot area. But the other 10 feet, why does that need to be added to it?
Well, if I stayed with the 25-foot buffer, my cost of plantings would be less. But with the 10-foot, to me, it was a win-win. Better buffer, and my customers get 10 more foot of backyard.
Just out of curiosity, based on where the access road is behind those houses to the north, how far is that buffer from that dirt road? How far before it starts?
That road is gone.
Okay, I didn't drive up there.
That road, our property actually goes right up to the tree line, so that road is now gone.
Okay.
We were using that as access, but we now.
So then, my question would be, as far as ditch maintenance for the northern ditch, when this buffer, when you plant this buffer, how much access will they have from your property to be able to maintain the ditch?
Very little, because that ditch is actually not on our property at all. So there really wouldn't be any maintenance from our side.
The maintenance would have to occur from the north.
I guess what I'm asking is from the, because some of those properties on their side, they can't access the ditch because of the trees, but from your side of the ditch, let's say from the top edge of the drainage ditch, your property goes right up to the drainage ditch, or how far away is it from?
It stops short of the drainage ditch. We're about 5 feet short of the drainage.
So they'd have about,
Very little as it goes down.
so they'd have 4 or 5 feet.
On the average, I've got at least probably 4 or 5 feet before we get to the top of
So there's still some room for them to get
There's still
into?
some room in there, yes.
Okay.
And, you know, again, the drainage that was in there at the time was draining across our property, and when they treated that property, the church that owned it several years ago, they collapsed all of those ditches in there. One
Right.
of them we redug during the development, but then we've also put a 36-inch pipe under it that drains completely from the North Point ditch through our property out to the south ditch. It does not drain into our property and then out. It clearly has a straight path.
Okay.
I have a question. On the north side,
Yes, sir.
you say that there are existing trees that, weren't altered, damaged. How would you best describe that in density, age of, the maturity of trees, or?
I wish I brought my pictures, because for the community meeting, I took pictures of the entire tree line. The tree line that was there prior to development is still intact. It's a solid tree line. Now, there are a couple of areas, and I've already talked with my landscaper, that he put in his proposal. I don't know the exact address, but there's a couple spots. One guy completely cleared all the trees behind his house and piped the ditch. We're gonna replant trees in there to create a buffer again. There's two other spots in there that are a little bit thin that he's gonna beef up the landscaping in, so that at the end of the day, it's not gonna be total mature trees like that are there now, but eventually can grow into that. But we're gonna fill in those blank areas as well as put in our buffer. We're gonna put a little extra in where it's needed.
It sounds to me like you've already got a buffer there.
Yes, sir. I actually went there tonight, now that daylight savings time, I haven't been there at night. Sitting in my car on that job, I could not see house lights through the trees, except where the bare areas were. Other than that, I couldn't see the lights through the trees. It's that thick.
I have a question for you also about the location of the current tree line. Where does that fall within, does it fall within the 10-foot boundary or a 25-foot boundary where all those trees are located currently?
Where those trees are located currently is not on my property at all, so the 10-foot buffer that I would install would be
In addition,
to
okay,
those trees that are there.
thank you.
Yes.
Ms. Vala, am I correct in saying that he does not have to do a 10-foot buffer and an additional 10-foot buffer?
Right.
He is required by ordinance to put in a type A buffer. As part of his conditional zoning application, he put in the condition of the 20-foot buffer. He is not required to do that.
I mean 25 foot?
He put in in this request, it's 20 foot.
Right, but I mean previously?
Previously, it was 25. It could be labeled just a type A buffer and remove condition 3 completely. The type A buffer would be all he would be required to label. And then during the construction process, we would work out the width requirement at that point as to what he chose to do. So if the board is heading in that direction, staff would support the complete removal of that third condition.
So he could choose either the 25-foot?
He could.
As it is now, or a 10-foot?
He could. That would give him the option to choose that.
If I were a property owner in the North Point subdivision that was abutting his property, I personally would want the 10-foot buffer because it would have a thicker
Exactly.
buffer than a 25-foot buffer, which would be less. And I understand what you're saying from an economic standpoint. It costs you more to do that, but if I'm interpreting what you're saying,
Willing to do that.
that's what you would like to do.
To them that evening that I would do that.
I have one question, for you. If you gave that extra 10 foot legally to the homeowners that are buying from your property, okay, they gain an extra 10 feet. When you start doing that and you start building this buffer in, how, if anything, does it affect the drainage? 'Cause it seems like the whole issue, even with all its buffers, is the drainage. I mean, are you then giving the property owner, individual property owner, a chance to build another shed back there that's going to somehow or another affect the natural drainage?
No, ma'am. And the reason is because of the new stormwater regulations my property is actually sitting about 4 or 5 feet higher than North Point's, and that's that slope that goes down, just that little bit that will drain into that ditch, that's about 20 feet. So where we put it, everything is draining to the front. That 10 foot won't get it, whether it's 10 or 20 foot, the drainage is gonna remain exactly the same.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So even if the homeowner puts sheds and does their own little
You
planning?
wouldn't be able to put it unless they want their shed like that.
Okay,
Seriously.
okay,
They have to
that was
stay
my
in.
question,
Yes, ma'am.
is how would it affect the
That's
drainage?
a great question, but the way that this thing is shaped up, they would not be able to do that.
Okay.
Okay, we're at 25 feet now,
Yes, sir.
and your homeowners theoretically are going to get an extra 5, so we're down to the 20-foot, we'll call it 10 and 10, to give you the option. So we've got 10 feet of buffer. What's going to happen with the other 10 feet? Grassland?
It's either gonna be empty, or I'm gonna take that 10 foot of buffer and fill in and just try to make it look good at the 20 feet versus just the 10 feet. In other words, it'll have the same amount of trees, same amount of bushes, same amount of everything, just a matter of how my landscaper spreads it out to try and make it look as good as we can versus trying to condense it down to the 10 foot and create a thicker buffer.
Okay.
Am I correct in saying that the rear setback is 10 feet on that subdivision?
For accessory structures, that would be correct. It's 20,
So
25
just to
feet, isn't it?
Ms. Jane's question.
I'd have
he
to go
couldn't
back
put
and
any-
look and
or
see if yours
a homeowner couldn't put anything any closer than
For
10
the
feet.
homes,
yeah, did you reduce your rear setback? So it's 25.
25, yeah, it's
So it's
25 feet, yeah.
So even if it were a 10-foot buffer only, there'd still be another 15 feet before a homeowner could place the rear edge of a shed there.
Of the primary structure.
I thought it was
An
20
accessory structure can be 10 feet.
I
So
thought it
a
was
shed
25
could be
feet
10 feet.
from the property line, not the buffer.
I'm sorry?
It's 25 feet from the property line.
Correct.
Which doesn't include the buffer.
It does include the buffer.
It does?
His buffer would be located within the boundaries of his individual lots.
right.
Oh, it is, okay.
Yes.
Okay, so it's 25 feet.
But in that 25 feet is the buffer.
Got it, yep.
as well. But the houses, I can tell you, are not that far back, because the idea is to give the folks a large enough backyard to do things that they want to.
So the reality of it is, if he were to only do a 10-foot buffer with the type A buffer, that will allow the homeowner to have 15 more feet of lot instead of going with the 25-foot buffer.
Correct.
Is that right?
Correct.
So that only helps to aid his bottom line in a sense, because then you have a slightly larger lot. You have a 15 by whatever width, comparatively priced to a smaller lot. Yeah.
But honestly, I don't think
Yeah.
it's gonna phase it one way or the other. It really comes down to what's gonna be.
I mean, that's not a negative saying. That would be a positive thing, perhaps, to offset your costs of putting in the type A buffer at 10 feet instead of 25 or 20.
I wish I could do that, but the bottom line is it's what the market bears. Whether it's a 10 foot, 20 foot, or 50 foot, that's.
Okay,
Here for any other questions you may ask.
thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who wants to speak to this issue, one way or the other? Okay, if not, I'm going to close the public hearing. I'm going to entertain a motion, but let me say before we say a vote, this has nothing, absolutely nothing to do with drainage. So I just soon not hear that word in any kind of motion. So therefore,
I'd like to have some discussion first.
Go
Just a
ahead.
moment. If you guys haven't already figured it out, I don't believe that the number 3 is necessarily needed.
Nope.
Because he's willing to do either, and he has proven in the past that he goes along with what the county recommends, and he's willing to help the homeowners of the North Point subdivision by creating a 10-foot buffer. And I don't see the need for having number 3 in there, only just to say a type A buffer. along
Type
the
A buffer.
northern property line.
For clarification, should that be removed from, which we, both parties agree to, we'll need to formally handle that before the Board of Commissioners meeting, so I will in turn send you an email that will address that, if that is in fact the board's recommendation.
Is that what you guys are
what I
thinking
mean,
as well?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's ridiculous to put that in there. He says he's willing to do the 10-foot.
Yep.
And it doesn't make sense to ask him to do 20 feet if he's only required to do 10.
Well, I don't think we need to specify the.
We just say Class A.
Just the-
It's just Class A.
Just the type A buffer should be.
A buffer. Right.
should be
And that's
adequate.
required by ordinance anyway,
That
so
would
you
give
don't
them the
have to
option
include
do
that as a
either
condition.
or.
We don't,
No.
okay. Anything else? Okay. So now I will entertain a motion.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve conditional zoning amendment with the suggested conditions of approval, number 1 and number 2, and change number 3 to state the type A buffer along the northern property line, parentheses, north point boundary, in parentheses, shall be installed, period. Because it's in the public interest, and it does not appear that it will negatively affect any of the abutting subdivisions.
I second the motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries.
Thank you all.
Thank you, sir.
Merry Christmas.
Okay, next item, PB 17-9, conditional rezoning Mainstay Construction Incorporated. Request for conditional rezoning of 20.1 acres from agriculture to conditional, single-family mainland for the purpose of developing a 13-lot transitional subdivision. And Mr. Litterall, this is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. So the applicant is requesting a conditional rezoning of approximately 20 acres from agriculture to conditional single-family mainland. The property is currently vacant. It does have some farmland, some wooded areas. And the conceptual plan that was turned in with the application shows a 13-lot major subdivision. With all the lots being 40,000 square feet or greater. And if you take a look at the zoning map, you can see that it's already surrounded mainly by residential zoning. There is one lot out near the road that would remain agriculture. And you'll also notice that, which direction is that? West, just to the west, there's a conditional SFM zoning district that's already in place there for Dustin Acres subdivision, which is quite similar to this request. The request appears to be consistent with the land use plan, has appropriate densities and appropriate use of land for the area. It's also consistent with the Moyock Small Area Plan, in particular policy CC1. Also has appropriate densities for the designation of limited service that it has within that small area plan. And for these reasons, the Technical Review Committee is recommending approval of the application. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Questions for staff?
I can't read the print on here. What's the distance between the ingress and that property, the boundary to the right?
I don't have that map in there.
From which egress?
The ingress from Tulls Creek Road?
What distance is it on?
We can look, see, got about, total length is about 600 feet
Okay.
along Tulls Creek Road, and that access is pretty close to being in the center.
Well, that's what I'm saying. So it's 300 feet from there to the boundary to the south.
About that.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Bolivar, what is it, or Mr. Literal, what is the speed limit on Tulls Creek Road? at
That's
this
where I was going.
location?
Should be 3, I don't know what it is,
Is it
but
55?
55. Yeah,
On Tulls Creek?
55.
I feel like I should say that there are conditions that have been proposed that we agree to. Minimum building size of 1,800 square feet. Wood frame construction only in the subdivision. Farm animals are prohibited. And there was a fourth condition for individual mailboxes and individual rollout trash cans. But we've since learned that the post office is, in general, requiring clustered mailboxes at the entrance to a subdivision. And I believe that the applicant has requested a waiver to that, but I'll let them speak to that in a minute.
Was the answer to the question about the speed limit 55?
55.
55.
Yeah.
Thank you. I didn't hear it clearly.
sorry. Anybody else for staff? Okay, if not, we will hear from the applicant. Please state your name and address.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the planning board. My name is Dylan Tillett. I work with Blythe and Associates. Our address is 8466 Currituck Highway in Powell's Point, Currituck. I think Mr. Little did a great job explaining the project, giving the summary, and we're certainly here, myself and the owners are here tonight to answer any questions you all may have. About the cluster mailbox. We did apply to the post office to request a waiver for the cluster mailboxes. Followed up a few times, have not heard back, so that's to be determined. If they come back and require cluster mailboxes, that's going to be fine with us. Owner as well.
Is this one big cluster of mailboxes out at the front of the sold subdivision?
Yes, it'd be your typical cluster mailbox that you see. Postal Service doesn't require many restrictions, but the county will require ADA compatibility and a certain amount of parking spaces. It'll be compliant with the Currituck County's regulations.
Is that something new? I mean, most subdivisions I see have mailboxes.
It's fairly new, right?
It is
Couple years, yeah.
Thank you.
I would suggest that, given the uncertainty, that you might want to just remove that condition so that it doesn't cause issues in the future. Those requirements for the clustered mailbox are required by the building code anyway, so should be a non-issue on our end if it changes.
That's fine.
Yeah.
The worst that can happen for them is that the postal services, they say, hey, you got to put it there. That's just money out of you guys' pocket in order to put it there. I'm sure they're not cheap.
I'm sure you could probably surmise from mine and Stephen's question that my concern was that corner to the south, it's 55 miles an hour. This is nothing you can do about this. It's just a concern. If you've driven Tulls Creek Road before, and they usually go about 65 or more, coming around that corner, it's a blind corner when people are coming out of that, coming out from that community right there. So it's just a concern. Nothing you can do about it. I mean.
Understood.
Any other questions? Thank you, sir.
No problem. Thank you.
Is there anyone else that would like to speak to this issue? Okay, we'll close this public hearing. If there's no further discussion of the board, over here, I will entertain a motion. No, go ahead, I don't care. Do I hear a motion?
I'll motion we approve this as is.
Could you state those facts, please? Page
Okay.
236 of your packet.
Don't forget about condition number 4.
Right.
You want to take that out?
Right.
I forgot about that. Okay. I'll motion we approve the request for rezoning of the 20.1 acres with the number 4 removed, you said?
Yes, condition number 4.
If you agree, sir, I would like to just speak to the other 3 conditions of approval, if you don't mind. Number 1 is minimum building size of 1,800 square feet. Number 2 is wood frame construction only. And number 3 is farm animals are prohibited. And you've already, in your motion, deleted item 4.
Yes. That's correct.
Is that agreeable with you?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. All right, we have a motion. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Okay.
Any opposition, nay. Motion carries. All right.
I know, right?
Merry Christmas. Okay, the next item is PB 17-15, UDO text amendment 2017. Request to amend the text of the UDO as it relates to the size and placement of cupolas. Cupola, I can never pronounce that word right. Them things that stick up there.
Francis Ford Coppola.
Yeah, and other, good Lord, what kind of words did y'all use? Appurtenance, whatever. That exceed the height of the UDO. What's that word?
Appurtenance.
Huh?
Appurtenance.
Appurtenance.
Yeah,
Oh,
okay.
was appurtenance?
I think I've learned a new word today. All right, Mr. Littoral, this is yours too.
Thanks again, Madam Chairperson. So here we are discussing cupolas again. We discussed this at the last meeting, but now we're bringing before you an actual text amendment, particularly to section 10.3.6, height exceptions. And we are proposing to add letter E, which states that the maximum area of appurtenances, including church spires, belfries, cupolas, and domes, shall be determined as follows. And then there are three conditions here. Number 1, that the area of the base of appurtenances shall not singularly or collectively exceed 10% of the footprint of a structure's roof, or 200 square feet, whichever is less. Number 2, the appurtenance shall be situated on top of a roof, and in no case shall it extend below the midpoint of a roof's ridge and eave. And number 3, that the walls of the appurtenance shall not be directly in line with any exterior walls of the structure. And that's it.
Okay? Any questions for the staff?
My question would be, did we give any consideration to overall height?
Currently, the ordinance requires 200 feet as a maximum.
200 feet.
And that was most likely due to the broad list of items that are included in this exemption section.
But for this text amendment, we can't modify that portion of the UDO to,
But we can.
You can.
we can. Okay.
Yeah, I would suggest we modify the
At
definition of
least
the cupola
cupolas anyway,
alone to have a maximum height and of less than 200 feet.
Not the definition, but have something in this section.
Correct.
Okay.
My suggestion would be 75 feet overall height, maximum.
From finished grade level.
From grade.
Okay.
And then line number 3 under E3,
Yes.
the very bottom line, it says with the any. Maybe you need to strike the out.
Yep.
So it just says with any.
Thank you. Right here.
Grammar police.
I was going to say, my children would have hated you.
Good catch. Good catch.
Very nice proofreading, though. Well done.
I'm ready to make a motion.
Anything else?
Nope.
Man's in a hurry. Okay, then I will entertain a motion.
Madam Chairman, I'd like to make a motion to approve the text amendment PB 1715 and adding under E, add a 4 that says the overall height of the roof of a cupola shall be no greater than 75 feet from finished grade. That way we specify the height of the cupola, because it's in the public interest, and it isn't logical that a cupola would be a height of 200 feet.
Do you want to specify the roof of the cupola or just any part of the appurtenance?
My suggestion would be overall height of the cupola.
Yeah.
In
Which would
case
be
they
the
put a-
roof, right?
Well, they might put
The
a
top of the
finial,
roof.
or something on top of there,
Okay.
or something of that nature. Let's just, the overall height.
So the overall height. I'm not in objection to doing that.
Okay.
If we can change that to say that number 4, overall height of the total appurtenance of the cupola shall be no greater than 75 feet, measuring from finished grade level.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, that's a motion. Do we have a second?
I second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? Nay. Motion carries. Huh?
Nothing.
Whatever. Shut up.
She's a short-timer now, Fred.
That's right.
She's liable to really tell you that.
Right.
That's right. I would like to tell you all, even though we've already discussed this, that is officially, this is my last meeting of the planning board, because I have served my specified term. I will serve until someone is appointed to take my place by the Board of Commissioners, and that could be before the next meeting or not, but whatever. Regardless of that, I would resign my position as chairperson, so that no matter what happens with me personally, you all can move on with someone who will be here to serve for the remainder. I want to tell you all that I have enjoyed this immensely. I have learned so much. It's amazing how stupid I was when I came on this board. But anyway, not with you guys as well as the people who were on the board when I came on the board. Everybody's been so smart and so with the program because of your careers, most of you, in real estate or in building or in things. And, you know, I'm just a retired nurse. I don't know anything about all this stuff. But it's been interesting to learn it from you all. And I thank you for that. And I have been so impressed with our staff. They are just
They're excellent.
so knowledgeable.
They do a
And
lot
it's-
of hard work.
They do work, and it's been great that they've been available when I had a question, and it's just been a very positive and enjoyable position for me, and I'm going to miss it.
You can come and be
You've
in the
done an
audience.
excellent job, Carol.
Thank you. I don't
You've
sit-
let us.
Yeah,
you've let
If
us
I sit
well
out there,
over
I
this.
can't say anything. I ain't doing that. It wouldn't be any fun.
You led us well over this last year as the chairperson. And
Thank
We
you.
really appreciate all your hard work that you've done in the background and leading us and maintaining order in the room.
Sometimes. Well, thank you all, and I would like to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year and much success in your future endeavors. Any other announcements?
I'd like to make an announcement.
Go ahead.
For those of you who perhaps did not attend the joint meeting of the Land Use Plan Steering Committee, the Planning Board, and the Board of Commissioners, it was a very enthusiastic meeting. There was a lot of information that was passed from the steering committee members to the Planning Board and the Board of Commissioners, and the meeting went very well. And I won't ask Lori to speak because her voice is whacked out right now.
Thank you.
But it was a great opportunity for our county to come together with the 12 Land Use Plan Steering Committee members to come together and share ideas and help to shape the future of Currituck over the next 20 to 40 years.
Yes, it was.
I have decided that I will be a thorn in the flesh of the commissioners about the name, because I have been told that it's not written in stone, and so I have lots of other people that have made suggestions, so I just got to get it all down and give them a fit about it. That'll take my priority now instead of this.
I don't recall if I made it official, but I'm going to be running for the District 5 Moyoc seat for county commissioner, so you can come talk to me.
Okay. Okay, if there's nothing further, then we will be adjourned, and thank you.
Thank you.
Aye.
I ain't taking, you don't have to take a vote on adjournment.